the neighbor who watered flowers and buried secrets. There's something deeply unsettling about discovering that the person who smiled at you every morning, who waved from across the fence, who seemed to embody the very essence of normalcy, was hiding something unimaginable. We trust our neighbors. We have to. They're the people who share our streets, our daily rhythms, the quiet backdrop of our lives. But what happens when that trust is shattered? What happens when the garden next door, so carefully tended and admired, becomes a crime scene? This is the story of those neighbors, the ones who watered their flowers and buried their secrets. It's a story that forces us to question everything we think we know about the people living right beside us. A quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where children ride bikes until the streetlights come on, where people know each other's names, where life moves at a peaceful, predictable pace. On one particular street, there's a house that everyone admires. The lawn is immaculate, trimmed with precision. The flower beds overflow with color, roses and tulips and hydrangeas arranged with an artist's touch. The neighbor who lives there, let's call them Alex, is pleasant enough, polite, reserved, the kind of person who keeps to themselves but never seems unfriendly. They water those flowers every evening, like clockwork. People walking their dogs often stop to compliment the garden. Alex smiles, nods, maybe exchanges a few words about the weather or the best fertilizer for summer blooms. Everything seems perfectly, beautifully normal. But beneath that carefully cultivated surface, something else is growing, something dark. Because Alex isn't just a dedicated gardener. Alex is someone with secrets that run deeper than the roots of those prize-winning roses. And those secrets, quite literally, are buried in that very garden that everyone stops to admire. The truth is, monsters don't look like monsters. They look like us. They blend in seamlessly, often more seamlessly than the rest of us. They understand that the best place to hide is in plain sight, behind a veneer of normalcy so convincing that it becomes invisible. This is the paradox that makes cases like these so terrifying and so fascinating. We want to believe that evil announces itself, that we'd somehow sense it, that our instincts would warn us. But history tells us otherwise. Time and time again, the most horrific crimes have been committed by people who seemed utterly ordinary, even exemplary. The helpful neighbor, the respected professional, the quiet person who never caused any trouble. Think about Dennis Nilsen, the British serial killer who murdered at least 12 young men in his London flat between 1978 and 1983. His neighbors smelled something terrible coming from his drains. They complained about it repeatedly, but Nilsen was articulate, educated, seemed respectable. He worked as a civil servant. He convinced everyone that the smell was probably a plumbing issue, nothing more. No one suspected that he was dismembering bodies and flushing them down the toilet, that the blockage in the shared drainage system was literally human remains. He hid in plain sight, and the normalcy of his appearance became his greatest weapon. Or consider John Wayne Gacy, who became known as the Killer Clown. Gacy was a pillar of his Chicago community. He was a Democratic Party precinct captain. He organized elaborate street parties. He dressed up as Pogo the Clown to entertain children at hospitals and charitable events. People genuinely liked him. He was married, successful in business, active in local affairs. Meanwhile, beneath his house, in the crawl space, he was burying the bodies of 33 young men and boys. His neighbors had no idea. Some even described him as helpful and friendly. The mask of normalcy was so complete that it took years before anyone seriously suspected him of wrongdoing. These cases share a common thread. They involve people who understood something fundamental about human psychology. We don't want to believe that evil lives next door. We resist it. We rationalize strange smells, odd behaviors, inconsistencies in stories, because accepting the alternative is too disturbing. It would shatter our sense of safety, our belief that we live in a fundamentally ordered and predictable world. So we make excuses, we look away, we tell ourselves it's probably nothing. And sometimes, that denial is exactly what allows the horror to continue. But let's return to Alex and that beautiful garden. What finally unraveled the facade? Often in these cases, it's something small, a chance discovery, a tiny crack in the carefully constructed lie. Maybe a pet digs in the garden and unearths something that shouldn't be there. Maybe a utility worker needs to excavate the yard for repairs and finds something unusual in the soil. Maybe Alex gets careless, or the weight of the secret becomes too heavy to bear alone, and they tell someone who doesn't keep the confidence. Or maybe, as in so many cases, someone simply goes missing, and eventually, the investigation leads to that quiet house with the immaculate garden. When the truth comes out, the neighborhood erupts into chaos. News vans line the street. Police tape surrounds the property. Forensic teams in white suits carefully excavate the garden, removing the flowers one by one, sifting through the soil for evidence. And the neighbors, the ones who walked past that house every day, who admired those flowers, who exchanged pleasantries with Alex, they're left with a sickening realization. They lived mere feet away from something monstrous and never knew. The cognitive dissonance is almost unbearable. In the aftermath, everyone remembers things differently. Some neighbors suddenly recall moments that seemed odd at the time, but were dismissed. The time Alex was gardening late at night, the way they seemed nervous when someone got too close to a particular section of the yard, the fact that they never invited anyone inside the house. In retrospect, these details seem significant, even obvious, but in the moment, they were just quirks, easily explained away or forgotten entirely. This is what psychologists call hindsight bias. Once we know the outcome, we convince ourselves we saw the signs all along, even though we didn't. It's a way of regaining a sense of control, of believing we're not as vulnerable as we actually are. The psychological profile of someone who commits these acts is complex and disturbing. These aren't typically crimes of passion or impulse. They require planning, patience, and a staggering level of compartmentalization. The ability to maintain two completely separate realities, to water flowers in the morning after burying a body the night before, requires a detachment from empathy that most of us simply cannot comprehend. Psychologists often describe this as a profound lack of affect, an emotional flatness that allows the person to view others not as human beings, but as objects, obstacles, or opportunities. What drives someone to this point? The answers are never simple or satisfying. Some have histories of abuse or trauma that fractured their sense of empathy early in life. Others may have antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy, conditions characterized by a lack of remorse, manipulative behavior, and a superficial charm that masks the absence of genuine emotion. But not everyone with these conditions becomes violent, and not everyone who commits these crimes fits neatly into a diagnostic category. Human behavior is messy, shaped by countless variables, genetic predispositions, environmental factors, choices made, and opportunities seized. What we do know is that secrecy is essential to these crimes. The garden, in cases like these, becomes more than just a hiding place. It becomes a symbol of control, a physical manifestation of the power to conceal, to maintain the facade. Every time Alex waters those flowers, they're also tending to their secret, reinforcing the barrier between appearance and reality. There's almost a ritualistic quality to it, a way of asserting dominance over the hidden truth. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. For every case that's discovered, how many remain hidden? How many secrets are still buried, quite literally, in backyards and basements and forgotten places? The uncomfortable truth is that we don't know. We can't know. Most crimes are solved because someone makes a mistake, or gets unlucky, or because circumstances change in a way that exposes what was hidden. But if someone is careful enough, patient enough, and if no one goes looking, a secret can stay buried for decades, perhaps forever. This brings us to a broader question about the nature of communities and the social contracts we make without ever speaking them aloud. We agree to trust our neighbors because the alternative is exhausting and paranoid. We can't live our lives suspecting everyone of hiding something terrible. Society would collapse under the weight of that constant vigilance. So we extend a baseline level of trust. We accept surface presentations at face value, and most of the time, that trust is warranted. Most neighbors are exactly who they appear to be. Most gardens are just gardens, but the exceptions, when they occur, are devastating precisely because they violate this fundamental trust. They remind us that the boundary between safety and danger can be as thin as a fence line, that the most horrific acts can occur in the most ordinary places. And once you learn this, once you truly internalize it, You can never look at your own neighborhood quite the same way again. That pleasant person across the street, are they really just pleasant? Or are they, too, maintaining a careful facade? You'll probably never know, and that uncertainty, that fundamental unknowability of other people's inner lives, is both the price and the paradox of living in society. The aftermath of these discoveries extends far beyond the immediate crime scene. Families of victims finally get answers, though those answers often bring more pain than closure. Communities struggle with trauma, collective guilt, questions about what they should have seen or could have done. Property values on the street plummet. People move away, unable to live with the memory of what happened nearby. The house itself often becomes cursed in a sense, difficult or impossible to sell, forever associated with the horror that occurred there. Some are eventually demolished, the land cleared as if erasing the physical structure might somehow erase the history. But history doesn't erase so easily. For investigators and forensic specialists, these cases are both challenging and haunting. The process of excavating a garden for human remains is painstaking, requiring expertise in forensic anthropology, archaeology, soil science, and decomposition patterns. Every inch of earth must be carefully sifted, every anomaly investigated. It can take weeks or months to fully process a site, and the people doing this work, they carry the weight of it. They see things that most of us will never have to see, and they do it in service of truth, of justice, of giving victims and their families some measure of recognition and dignity. The legal proceedings that follow are equally complex. Defense attorneys must grapple with cases that seem indefensible, where the evidence is overwhelming and the acts committed are beyond comprehension. Prosecutors must present the facts without sensationalizing, must help juries understand not just what happened, but who the defendant is beneath the mask they wore so successfully for so long. And juries, ordinary people pulled from the community, must sit through testimony and evidence that will likely haunt them for the rest of their lives, then render a verdict that acknowledges the full weight of what was done. But beyond the legal outcomes, beyond the convictions and sentences, what do we take away from stories like these? What do they teach us about human nature, about the communities we build, about the limits of our ability to truly know one another? Perhaps the lesson is humility, an acknowledgement that people are vastly more complex than they appear, that surfaces can deceive, and that the assumptions we make about normalcy and safety are more fragile than we want to admit. There's also something here about attention and awareness, not paranoia, but a kind of mindful presence, noticing when something seems off, taking concerns seriously rather than dismissing them, creating communities where people feel comfortable speaking up about suspicious behavior without fear of being seen as nosy or dramatic. So many cases have been cracked because someone finally decided to trust their instincts, to make that phone call, to take that extra step even when it felt uncomfortable or uncertain. And perhaps most importantly, these stories remind us of the value of empathy and connection. Isolation enables secrets. When people are truly connected to their communities, when there are relationships of trust and openness, it becomes harder to maintain elaborate deceptions. Not impossible, but harder. Community, real community, is a form of distributed awareness, a network of attention that makes it more difficult for horrors to hide in plain sight. As we close this story, think about your own neighborhood. Think about the people you see regularly, but don't really know. That person watering their flowers, tending their garden, offering a friendly wave. Almost certainly, they're exactly who they appear to be. An ordinary person living an ordinary life, finding small joys in the simple act of making things grow. But the lesson of Alex, and of all those others who hid behind masks of normalcy, is that we can never be entirely certain. The person next door is, in the end, unknowable in their fullness. We see only what they choose to show us. And sometimes, just sometimes, what they're hiding is more terrible than we could ever imagine. The flowers bloom, beautiful and bright, unaware and unconcerned with what lies buried beneath their roots. They're just flowers, after all. But for those who know the truth, who've learned what was hidden in that carefully tended garden, those flowers will never look quite the same again. They become a reminder that beauty and horror can exist in the same space, that surfaces deceive, The most disturbing secrets are often the ones kept closest to home, in the places we thought we knew best, by the people we thought we could trust. That's the story of the neighbor who watered flowers and buried secrets. And it's a story that, once heard, changes everything about how we see the world around us.